In this video, I'll be showing you how to create an authenticated API in Python using FastAPI and token authentication. Don't worry if you don't know FastAPI, I will teach that to you in this video, and in part 2 of this series, I'll show you how we host the API on a Linode server and run it so that anyone can access it, well, anyone that is authorized. Now, before we get into the video, let me mention that my name is Tim. I'm a developer advocate for Linode, and I run the YouTube channel Tech with Tim, which has hundreds of other programming tutorials. With that said, let's get into the video. All right, so before I dive in, let me just share with you a bit more information about exactly what we're going to be doing and building here. So I'm going to start by showing you how to set up FastAPI, how to run the server, create some basic endpoints, but then after that, I'm going to dive right into authentication and authorization. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to have a username and password for every single user, and as soon as you sign in with that username or password, you're going to be issued a token. Now, this token is a JWT token, otherwise known as an authorization token, and this is going to contain kind of encoded data that represents you. So our tokens are going to have an expiry date or an expiry time. Maybe they last 15 minutes, 30 minutes, etc. And essentially what the user will have to do, or the client will have to do, is every time they want to hit an endpoint that requires authentication, they're going to have to submit this token. Now, if their token is expired, then they can just resend their credentials and they can get a new token. And the reason we have an expiry date on the tokens is so that if someone were to steal the token, they'd only be able to use it for a certain period of time before they would need to re-authenticate themselves and sign in again with their username and password. There's various other ways to go about doing this, but this is going to show you kind of how you do that flow in Python. It's actually fairly straightforward. You don't need to know too much about cryptography or hashing. That's kind of all done automatically for you. And with that said, let's go ahead and dive in and I'll show you how we actually get that going. So the first thing we need to do here is install quite a few Python packages. So I've opened up Visual Studio Code. I'm inside of a folder and I'm going to go to my terminal here. Now I'm going to be using Python version 3.9. Please use Python version 3.8 or above, just because of the typings that I'm going to be using in this video. They'll kind of differ if you're working in a lower version of Python. All right, so let's start installing our packages. The first package we're going to want is FastAPI, so let's use pip and install that. By the way, if you're on Mac or Linux, you're probably going to want to use pip3 here rather than pip. And if that doesn't work, you can try Python-m pip install or Python 3-m pip install, and ideally one of those commands will work for you to install these packages. Okay, next we're going to say pip install, and this is going to be uvicorn and then standard. Now, this is essentially how we're going to run our web server. We're going to use this uvicorn. I don't know exactly how to describe it. It's pretty much just a web server. It's going to take our FastAPI code and just kind of display that and host that for us as a web server. Next, we are going to install something called Python and then multi-part. This is for decoding JSON data. This is going to be used internally by FastAPI. Okay, so let's get that installed. Next, we are going to use something called Python, and then this is going to be -Jose, and then here we're going to put cryptography. Okay, this is going to be used to do some password hashing, as well as kind of some stuff related to our JWT tokens, which are authentication or authorization tokens, whatever you want to call them. Sorry, I've just cleared the screen here so we have a bit more room. The next library we're going to install our package is going to be pip install, and then this is going to be passlib and then bcrypt. Okay, now this is what we're going to use, if I spell this correctly, to do our password hashing. So let's install that. And there you go. That is installed. That is all we need. Just to quickly go through this, because there was quite a few. We installed FastAPI. We installed uvicorn, and then this was the standard version. We installed Python, and then multi-part. We installed Python-Jose, and then here we had cryptography, and then we installed passlib, and we installed this with bcrypt. Okay, I think that is all that we had. Again, FastAPI, uvicorn standard, Python multipart, Python Jose, and then passlib bcrypt. Okay, there you go. Now we have everything installed, and we are ready to start working with FastAPI. So I'm going to create a new Python file here. I'm going to call this main.py. Feel free to call it whatever you want, but main.py is probably a good name. I'll just zoom in here so you guys can read this a little bit better. Okay, so let's set up a basic FastAPI API. To do this, we're going to say from FastAPI import, and I'm going to import a few things, so I'm not going to use all of them right now. First is depends. Next is FastAPI. Make sure you have the capitalization correct. Then HTTPS, or sorry, just HTTP, exception like that. And then status. We're just going to use this to get some status codes. Okay. Next, while we're here, we're going to say from FastAPI dot security import, and then we're going to import the auth, and then this is to password, and then bearer. This is something we're going to use related to our tokens. Then we're going to import the auth to password, and then this is going to be the request form. Okay, I think that's good for now. We'll import the rest of the stuff that we need later. Okay, so now next line that we're going to need here is app is equal to FastAPI. Okay, we're going to create an instance of FastAPI. And now that we have that, we can actually start creating some endpoints, and it's pretty straightforward and fast to do this. So let's create a basic kind of get endpoint. So to write our endpoint, we're going to say at, and then app, which is the name of this variable here. We're going to say the type, which is get. And then for the root, I'm going to do slash and then test and then slash, just because this is a test endpoint. Okay, next, what I'm going to do is say define, and then actually this needs to be an async function, sorry. So async define, I'm just going to call this test. You can call this whatever you want. And then inside of here, I'm simply going to return hello and then world. Okay, very, very basic endpoint, but I just want to show you how we run the server, view the documentation for this endpoint, etc. Okay, so now that we have all of this running, or we have all of this code, what we're going to do is go to the folder where our code is. In this case, it's an API. And I'm going to run the following command, which is uvcorn. Then this is going to be main :app -- reload. Now, notice main is the name of our Python file, and app is the name of our variable here. So if you've changed either of those, then you want to change this. And when you do -- reload, this just means it's automatically going to reload when you change anything in the file. So let's run this. Notice that it started running, and it tells us what port and the URL that it's running on. So I'm going to open this with control and then click. When I do this, it says not found because I don't have an empty root. Okay, that's fine, but our web server is indeed running, and you can see the kind of responses coming here. Now what I can do is go to /docs. And when I go to /docs, it's going to bring me to the documentation for this API. So you can see here that we have test, and what I can do is use this page to try out my different routes, which is what I'll do in this video, just to make things kind of nice and easy and fast for us. So in this case, we have no parameters. It doesn't define the response or anything like that. It just says a string is coming in application JSON. So what I'm going to do is click try it out, execute, and notice that we get our response here, which is hello world. Now, if this endpoint were to have different arguments, like a query parameter, we need to pass something in the body, then of course it would prompt us to do that here. But for now, you can see it's just giving us documentation for this endpoint. Now, it's worth noting that there is another form of documentation here. If you go to redoc, this is going to bring you to a different documentation page. I don't know exactly why they have this. I think it's just two different pages, kind of both outlining the documentation. This one is not as interactive as the other page, so, do with it as you will, but that is what you can do. You can go to redoc, or you can go to docs. We're just going to be using docs for the rest of this video. All right, so now what I'll do is just quickly show you how you would accept query parameters, path parameters, and request, or I guess body arguments, body data, whatever you want to call that. So if you want to accept a path parameter, what you can do is go to the path or to the root here, and inside of curly braces, you can place where you would want this to be. So I could do something like item_ID. Then I can go here to the function, and I can say item_ID. Now that's automatically going to link to this path here. So item ID will be equal to whatever you pass here. Now, if we want, we can actually specify what the type of this parameter is going to be by doing something like colon and then string. This is a type annotation in Python, and this is going to be used to help us document our API. So you want to provide types for whatever you can. What do you call it? FastAPI will try to infer some of the different types, but in this case, it's not going to be sure if this is an integer or a string or whatever. In our case, we can just specify it as a string, and now we know that we're accepting a string. Now, what I can do is say hello and then item_ID, just to prove to you that this is actually correct and we're getting the item ID. And now if I go back to my documentation, so I guess actually, can I open up the roots? Okay, I'm just going to do it myself. 127, and then /docs, and now we have item ID. Okay, so let's pass an item ID. We can do something like 100, and then execute. And notice that we get hello and then 100. And notice this is a string because the type is string. Okay, there you go. That is how you do a path parameter. Now, if you want to do a query parameter, what you can do is put a comma here, and you can just define a variable that's not defined in the path. So in this case, I could just do something like query. And then if I wanted this to be optional, I could do maybe is equal to 1. And then, of course, I could specify the type. In this case, I would say something like int, okay? Now, I don't have to make it optional. I can also just say query and then specify this is going to be an int. Okay, now that I do that, if I go back to my documentation, it should tell me here that I'm accepting a required query parameter. It does say that of type integer, and then I could use that. Okay, now let's just make it optional. So let's say query int is equal to 1. Go back here and notice it is no longer required because we made it an optional parameter. Okay, straightforward. That's how you do query parameters and path parameters. All right, so now that we've seen how to use our path and query parameters, the next thing I'll quickly show you is how to accept request or kind of JSON data. Now, the way we can do this is create another endpoint. I'm going to say app.post. For this, we can just do something like /create. And then here, I'm going to say async, define, let's call this create. And what I need to do, let's just return something kind of in the meantime, is I need to create a pydantic model, which is going to specify the type of data that I'm looking to accept. So I'm going to go here and say from pydantic import, then this is going to be base model. Now I'm going to go here and say class data, and this is going to inherit from base model. And then I'm going to do something like name, and I'm going to specify the type as string. Now that I've created this model, essentially what this is doing is defining the type of data that we're trying to accept in our kind of JSON data, request body, whatever you want to call it. And Pydantic will automatically perform validation on this data for us and make sure, for example, that the name is a valid string. If it's not, then it will return kind of a useful error message telling you that this was the incorrect type. You can get much more advanced with this. I'm not going to show that in this video. You can do all kinds of kind of advanced validation. However, for now, just understand you need to define it in a class which inherits from base model. So I'm going to go to create here, and now I'm simply going to say data, and then the type of this is going to be data. Now what I can do is simply return data, and then data like that. And now that I've done this, FastAPI automatically knows that this is going to be accepted in the request body as JSON data because we're using this Pydantic base model. If we just put a regular argument here, a regular variable here, I don't know, something like x, right? And we made this an int, then it's going to be a query parameter. But since this is a Pydantic model, it knows that this needs to be accepted as JSON data. Okay, so let's go back to our documentation. Let's refresh here. And now notice we have our post request, and let's go to try it out. And it tells us this is kind of a sample of what we're looking for in the body. So we have name, string. So let's just go name. Let's just go with Tim for now, and then execute this. And when we go and look at our response, this is our response. We have data, and then it has what we submitted, which was name Tim. Okay, there you go. That is kind of, accepting data into your functions. Now that we know how to do this, let's start looking at authentication and authorization. All right, so since we're going to do authentication now, let's get rid of all of this. This was just kind of to explain to you how FastAPI works on a simple level. And now we're going to import a bunch more stuff. So let's go here and say from datetime, import datetime and time delta. We're then going to say from Jose, import, and then this is going to be JWT error, and then JWT, this is related to our tokens. We're then going to say from passlib.context import, and then this is going to be a crypto context. And I think that that's all that we need for right now. Now, what we're doing with this line specifically is we are, if we spell this correctly, importing something that's going to allow us to hash our password. So that's why we have this kind of crypto context. I know it sounds a bit weird, but that's used for our password hashing. Okay, since we're going to do password hashing and kind of encoding JWT tokens and whatnot, we need a few things here. First thing we're going to need is our secret key. I'm going to show you how to generate this in 1 second, but for now, put that variable. Next, we're going to need the algorithm that we're using for our encryption or our hashing, which in this case is going to be HS256. Okay, and then we need another variable, which is going to be our access token. and then this is going to be expire, and then minutes. And in this case, I'll make it equal to 30 minutes. You can change this to be whatever you want. Now, just while I see this, it's telling me that I have an error here with crypto context. That's because this needs to be crypt context. Okay, so let's change that. And now when we save, everything is okay. All right, so now what we want to do is generate a secret key. Again, the secret key is going to be used as a part of our kind of encryption and hashing algorithm, sorry. So what I'm going to do is split my terminal to create a new one, and I'm going to run the following command. This is open SSL, rand, and then dash hex, and 32. Now this is going to create a 32-bit kind of secret key for us that is using hexadecimals, and it is random. Don't worry too much about exactly how this works. Just run the command, should work for you, and you're going to get this key. Now, obviously, you don't want to share this with people. I'm going to copy it and paste it here, and that's what I'm going to use for my secret key. Okay, so that's all we need. Again, that's open SSL, rand dash hex, and then 32. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to create kind of a fake database. Obviously, this would normally be a real database. In our case, we don't want to set up the database, so I'm just going to call this fake_db. And this is going to be an object or a Python dictionary. And what we're going to do is have usernames. In my case, I'll have Tim associated with user objects. So I'm going to say username, and then this is going to be Tim. And then I'm going to have full underscore name. This will be Tim Rasica. Then I'm going to have email. Let's just go tim@gmail.com. That's not my real email, obviously. Okay, let's add that. Next, we are going to have our hashed_password. Okay, I'll explain what this is in a second. For now, we're going to leave this blank. And then I'm going to say disabled is, and in this case, we'll make this false. This is just in case you've kind of signed in, but your access token is not valid or it's expired. All right. So that is our fake database. Now that we have our fake database, we need a few models to represent different data that we're going to have kind of as we create the next endpoints. So we're going to say class token. This is going to inherit from our base model. And we're going to say access underscore token. This is going to be a string. And then the token underscore type. This is also going to be a string. Okay. Next, we're going to have our token data. Now, this is the data that's going to be encoded by our token. Again, you'll see what this is in a second. For now, we're going to say username, and then this is going to be string or none, and this is going to be equal to none. Okay. Next, we're going to have class user. We're going to say base model again, and then we're going to define the attributes that we want. So in this case, username, string. We're then going to have email. This could be string or none. This will be equal to none. And then we're going to say full underscore name. This is going to be string or none equal to none, and then disabled, and this is going to be Boolean or none, and this for now will be equal to none. Again, you're going to see where we use all of these in a few minutes, but for now, let's just define all of the models so we get those out of the way. Next, we're going to have user in DB. This is going to say, sorry, not user, user like that, and then it's going to be hashed underscore password, and then string like so. All right, so now that we have that, let's just grab our app. I'm going to move this down below all of this, and I am going to set up a few variables. First variable is going to be our password context. Now this is going to be equal to crypt and then context like that. And then we're going to say schemes is equal to, and then bcrypt. This is just the specific cryptography algorithm that we're using. Next, we're going to say deprecated, and this is going to be equal to the string, which is auto, just so that we kind of use the default deprecation settings. All right, next, we're going to say OAuth, and then _2 underscore scheme is equal to, and this is going to be the OAuth2 password bearer that we imported earlier. And what we need to pass here is our token URL, which is going to be equal to token. Okay, now this is going to define essentially where we go to retrieve our access token. Okay, so now that we have that set up, we're going to write a few utility functions that we're going to use to authenticate users as well as to hash their passwords. Now, hashing a password essentially means that we are going to perform encryption on the password such that we're not storing anything in plain text. So that means if someone submits their password as, say, hello, we're going to run this through an encryption algorithm or a hashing algorithm. It's going to spit out what looks like a bunch of gibberish, but this is essentially going to be the encrypted version of this password. What we'll then do in the future is when someone submits another password trying to authenticate as this user, rather than checking if this password matches what's in the database, we are going to hash the password they submitted. And if that hash equals the hash that we've stored, then we know that they had the correct password. This allows us to authenticate that someone's password is correct without ever knowing or storing that password. Okay, so to do this, we need a few functions. First, we're going to write the verify underscore password function. This is going to take the plain password, okay, so plain text password, and then the hashed password, which will be stored in our database. And we're going to return the pwd context dot verify, and then we're going to verify the plain password with the hashed, and then password like that. Now, while I'm at it, I realized I spelled deprecate incorrectly, so let me just fix that keyword here, and now we're not getting an error in our terminal. Okay, so that's verify password. Next, we need to actually generate a password hash. So we're going to say get underscore password underscore hash. We're going to take in our password, and then we're going to return the pwd underscore context dot hash, and then we're going to hash our password. Okay, next we're going to write a function that grabs a user for us from our database. So we're going to say get underscore user. We're going to say db username. We can specify this is going to be a string. And then we can say if the username is in the database, then the user underscore data is equal to database at username. And then we can return the user in DB. And then what we're going to do is go asterisk, asterisk, and then user underscore data. Now, what this is going to do is essentially initialize our model. So it's going to initialize this user in DB model, which inherits from user, which inherits from base model, by passing all of the keyword arguments from this dictionary. So if we go look here, we have username, full name, email, hash, password disabled. When you use asterisk asterisk on a dictionary, if we could type this correctly, it essentially takes all of these values out and passes them as key value pairs or kind of named parameters. So it's going to say username equal to Tim, full name equal to Tim Rasika. It's going to do that to user in DB. So we'll have, username is equal to Tim. That's kind of how it passes the data. So it does that to initialize this model for us because the model accepts these kind of named parameters. It doesn't accept, JSON data, or in our case, I guess, a Python dictionary. Okay, so that's fine for now. Next, we're going to write an authenticate user function. So authenticate underscore user. This is going to take in our database, a username, which we can say is a string, and then a password, which again, we'll specify as a string. We're going to say our user is equal to get underscore user. We're going to get the user in the database that has the username equal to whatever we're trying to authenticate. Okay, so let's go name like that. And now what we need to do is essentially make sure this username exists and that the password is correct. So I'm going to say if not user, then return false, just meaning no, you are not authenticated. I'm going to say if not, and then this is going to be verify underscore password. We're going to pass the password, and we are going to get the password from right here, and then user.hashed underscore password like that. Remember, what verify password is going to do is verify the plain text password matches with the hashed password. It's going to do that by hashing this password essentially. Okay, so if that's not the case, then we're going to return false. Otherwise, we can return the actual user object. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, but that's how we authenticate that a user is indeed valid, by using their username and password. Next, we need a way to create our access token. So I'm going to say define create underscore access token. This is really the JWT token. We're going to say data dictionary. This is the data that we want to encode. And then I'm going to say expires underscore delta. This just means the difference between the current time and when we want this to expire. And the type of this is going to be time delta, which we imported from right here, or none. And we'll just make this equal to none for right now. So you don't have to pass one, but if you do, then we're going to use that. Okay, now we're going to say to encode equals data.copy. So we're going to copy this dictionary so that if we make any changes to it, it won't affect the original one. Then we're going to say if expires underscore delta, then the expired date is equal to datetime dot UTC now, which gives us the current UTC timestamp plus the time delta. So this is going to be the, expires underscore delta. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to say expire is equal to date time dot UTC now plus, and then we're going to put our own kind of default time delta of 15 minutes. So we're going to say minutes is equal to 15. Okay. Now that we have that, we're going to say to underscore encode dot update. Really, this just means we're adding a key to it. We're going to add the key exp, which stands for expiry. This is going to be equal to expire. And then we're going to say encoded underscore JWT is equal to JWT dot encode. And we're going to encode the to encode data. And we're going to do this using our secret underscore key. And the algorithm we're going to use is equal to the algorithm that we specified up here. Okay. So that's why we needed those values. So we're using JWT. Again, we're encoding this data. Right now, it's going to be whatever data is passed in here plus our expiry date. And then we use our secret key and our algorithm. Now that we have that, we can simply return the encoded JWT, and that is our access token. All right, now we are going to write a few functions related to actually getting our user from an access token, and then for actually creating an access token based on login data. All right, so bear with me here. This is going to be a little bit complicated, but I'll try my best to explain how everything works. So we're going to create a function here. This is going to be an async def. We're going to call this get, and then current underscore user. Now, here we're going to say token string is equal to depends, and we're going to depend on the OAuth2 underscore scheme. So what this does here is essentially calls this OAuth2 scheme function, which is going to parse out the token for us and give us access to it in this parameter. Now, you're going to see that we use this quite a bit as we go through the rest of this tutorial. We're going to depend on other functions. We may actually even depend on this function to kind of compute a value for us before we start actually running anything inside of a specific endpoint. I know it seems a little bit weird, but that's what this is doing. It's essentially parsing out the token data for us. And notice that this has the token URL of token, meaning it's going to go to that token URL if it needs to generate a new token. Okay, you'll see what I mean in a sec. For now, get current user. All right. Now we're going to say credential underscore like this exception is equal to HTTP exception. And we're going to say status underscore code is equal to status that we imported above dot HTTP underscore 401, if we could type this correctly, underscore un, and then authorized like that. Okay, that's our status code. Detail for this is going to be could not validate credentials. If you haven't been able to tell by now, we're going to raise this error if we can't authenticate the user. And then for the headers, we're going to say that this is www dash authenticate. Let's spell authenticate correctly. Okay. And then this is going to be colon and then bearer, telling you that we could not authenticate the bearer token. Okay, that's our credential exception. Next, we're going to go here and have a try and then accept block. We're going to accept the JWT error that we imported above. And then we're going to raise the credential underscore exception if we get that exception. Okay, now we're going to say payload is equal to JWT dot decode. We're going to decode the token that's provided to us by this dependency. And we're going to decode this using our secret underscore key, and the algorithms that we're going to use to decode this is going to be equal to algorithm if we spelled that correctly. Okay, now make sure you put this inside of a list. Kind of weird how this one works, but it takes multiple algorithms. All right, next we're going to say the username, which is a string, is equal to payload.get. And then we're going to get sub. Now, this is the key that we are going to encode inside of our JWT token. I know it seems a bit weird because we haven't actually fully created the token yet, but you'll see that this is the key that we're using that is going to store our username. And we're going to check if we have a username or not. So we're going to say if username is none. Now, if this is the case, we're going to raise our credential underscore exception. And then we're going to say that our token underscore data is equal to token data. And then the username is going to be equal to the username. Okay, so we're using this token data model that we created here so that we can store our username. All right, so let's continue here. Now that we've done this, we have our try and accept block. Let me just kind of clean this up a bit. We're going to go down beneath the accept. So if this was all successful, if we did not raise an exception here, then we're going to go and say user is equal to get underscore user. We're going to use our database, which I believe I've just called DB. And then we're going to say username is equal to, and then this is going to be the token underscore data dot username. Okay, so we're just grabbing it from here. Now that we've done that, we're going to say if user is none, then again, we're going to raise our credential underscore exception. Otherwise, we will simply return this user. Now get user, if we have a look at this here, is returning user in DB, which gives us access to all of the properties that we need. Now I'm getting an error here saying OAuth2 scheme is not defined. Let's go here. Okay, let me just remove that underscore to fix that naming. And now it looks like everything is all right. All right, so next function that we're going to write here is async define get underscore current underscore active underscore user. This is because it's possible the user may not actually be active. We could say disable a user and make them not able to log in. If that's the case, then we don't want to actually allow them to log in. We want to raise an exception. So what I'm going to do is say that the current underscore user, and this is going to be of type user in DB, is equal to depends. And we're going to depend on the get current user function, which we just wrote here. Okay, then we're going to go here. We're going to say if current underscore user is disabled, so dot disabled, then what we're going to do is raise an HTTP exception. The status underscore code is going to be equal to 400. And then the detail is inactive user. And I think that's all we need. Otherwise, we're going to return the current underscore user. And let's spell current correctly. Okay, so what are we doing here? Well, this is just telling us if a user is disabled or not. If they are disabled, then we're going to raise this. Otherwise, we'll just return the user that we got. So the way this works is that we are relying on the get current user function. This function is relying on the OAuth2 scheme, and that means that we're going to parse out the token. We're going to decode the token. We're going to get the user that was encoded in this token. We're going to make sure that they exist. If they do, we're going to get the token data, so the username associated with that. Then we're going to make sure that this user is inside of our database. If they are, we'll return the user. Otherwise, we're raising a credential exception. Then we go here and we're just making sure this user is enabled. We could remove this function and just use this one, but I just wanted to show you how we would use a disabled property, because oftentimes you want to be able to enable and disable different users from logging in. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to write our token root. So remember here, if we go to this OAuth2 scheme, we have our token URL. So we need to now write a URL that is /token, because that's what we put there. So we're going to say app.post/token, and the response underscore model is going to be equal to token. Now this is specifying what we're returning from this root. In this case, we're going to be returning a JWT token. Okay, now I'm going to say async define login for access underscore token. Okay, and we're going to say from underscore data, and then this is going to be OAuth2 password request form. Okay, and this is going to be equal to depends. I know this seems a little bit weird, but essentially what we're doing here, and this is not from data, sorry, this needs to say form data, is we're specifying that the data that we're going to accept here to generate a JWT token is going to be a username and password, and that's what's specified inside of this OAuth2 password request form. Now we're just making sure that we are relying on this. So we're depending on this form, which is going to parse out that data for us. And then once we have that, we can use it inside of here. Again, I know it seems a little bit weird. Essentially, it's just giving us username and password. That's what we're doing, okay? So we're going to say user is equal to authenticate underscore user. And we're going to use our database, which is DB. And then we're going to have our form underscore data dot username and our form underscore data dot and then password. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to say if not user, then we're going to raise an exception. So raise HTTP exception. We're going to have our status underscore code be equal to status dot HTTP underscore 401 underscore unauthorized. Okay, let's spell this correctly. And then we're going to have detail equal to incorrect username or password. All right. And then we're going to have headers, and let's just copy the header from our other exception, which is right here. Okay, so let's paste that in. All right, so obviously this is the exception we're raising when you pass us an invalid username or password, and we know that that's the case because if we don't get a user from authenticate user, then, well, we got an invalid username or password. All right, continuing here. Next, we're going to have our access underscore token underscore expires, and this is going to be equal to time delta, and then minutes is equal to the access underscore token underscore expires, and then underscore minutes. Okay. And then using this time delta, we're going to create our access token. So we're going to say access token is equal to create underscore access underscore token. And then our data that we want to encode is going to be subs. Remember, I told you this is the key. This is going to represent our user. We're going to say user dot username. And then we're going to say expires underscore delta is equal to, and then this is going to be the access underscore token underscore expires, like that. Okay, now that we have our access token, we're going to say return, and we're going to return, make sure you do exactly this, access token, colon, access token, and then the token underscore type is going to be bear. Okay, now notice that that is in compliance with this token. Okay, so we said response model. This is what we're returning. We're returning a token. So when we do that, it's automatically going to be converted kind of into this token object or this JSON data. And the reason for that is because we're using this base model. Again, let's have a look. Token, where we have our access token, and then our token type. So essentially, this route is what's going to be called when we are signing in with our username and password. And then it's going to return to us our token, which we can then use for whatever the duration of the token is. Now that we have that, let's create a few routes that we can actually call and that are kind of like authenticated routes, right? That rely on the fact that we are signed in. So we're going to say at app.get, let's go /users /me/ the response underscore model here is going to be user. And then we're going to say async define read underscore users me. Okay. And then we're going to say current underscore user is equal to depends. And we're going to depend on get underscore current, if we type this correctly, underscore active underscore user. Okay. I think that's all we need. And then we're just going to return whatever the current underscore user is. Okay. Now let's copy this and let's create another one. This time I'm going to say users /me /items. We don't need a response model here. And then for this, again, we can have our current user. That's fine. But let's change the function name. This is going to be read underscore own underscore items. And then we're going to return, let's return an array. I'm kind of just mocking what you would return if you were returning, user specific data. I'll say item underscore ID. This could be maybe say 1, and then we'll return the owner of this data, which is the current user. Okay, and we'll close our object or our dictionary here. All right, now since both of these routes rely on this get current active user, what's going to happen is we're going to go to get current active user. We're going to rely on get current user. Current user is relying on the OAuth2 scheme, which is relying on our token, which means that if we don't have a token, then an exception is going to be raised. That's going to tell us we're unauthorized and we cannot call these routes. So what we first need to do is we need to access our token by logging in. Again, once we get the token, then we are able to send our request. Now, what would happen in a real web flow or in a real, website is your front end or your client would first request the token. It would then save the token, and then it would use the token until it expires. Then it would request another token. So the token is kind of safe to store on the front end for a small duration of time. And that's why we have this expiry date, so that if the token were ever to be leaked, it's only vulnerable for a few minutes, right? Or however long we set the token kind of expiry time for. Now that we've done this, let's have a look at our documentation and let's actually try this out. So I'm going to refresh now. And notice we have /token, login for access token, and then we have this and read own items. Now, one thing to notice here is that we now have this authorize button kind of in the corner. Now, what authorize is going to do, if I click on it, is it's going to allow me to authorize with a username or password. It's then going to store my token on this front end and then automatically send that with my request so that I don't manually have to do it. Now, the issue here is that we haven't created a registration page, so any username or password I type in is not going to work because I don't have a valid username or password. So I'm quickly going to show you how you can kind of fake generate a password just for the example of this video. So I'm just going to hop out of this for 1 second. First of all, I realized that I called my database fake DB, not DB, and I was using DB everywhere. So I'm just going to change this to be DB so that now everything ideally should work. And we're just going to use one of these functions here. So in our case, it's going to be get password hash, just to kind of print out what the password hash would be of a password that we're then going to stick in our database. So I'm going to actually stop our server for 1 second. Okay, so I'm doing that with Control C. Now I have get password hash. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say pwd is equal to get underscore password underscore hash. Then I'll just put Tim1234. That's what I want my password to be. And we're going to print pwd. Now I'm just going to run my file. So Python main.py, no module named FastAPI. Okay, let me try running it with this. And there we go. Now we get our hash. All right, so let me copy this hash here. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it as my password, my hashed password in my database. Now I'll be able to sign in when I use the password Tim1234. So I know this is kind of like a janky way of doing it. However, we haven't created a registration route and it will take a few minutes to do that. So I figured I'll just show you how to do this for now. And then you guys could create a register route where you get a username, you get a password, you add that into your database, etc. Anyways, let's rerun our app with uvicorn main:app -- reload. Now let's go back here and let's refresh. Now remember the password is Tim1234. So I'm going to go to authorize. Now for the password, let me type in Tim1234. I'm going to authorize and I got an issue. It says access token expires minutes is not defined. Let's see why that's the case. I'm just going to copy this variable here, go to where I've put this and see maybe I just had a typo or something. Okay, it's because I have expire minutes, not expires minutes. Hopefully this is going to work now. Let's reauthorize and notice that we're all good. We have now authorized and it tells us we can log out if we want. Logging out is just going to clear our token, which would then require us to, relog in. Okay, so now that I'm signed in, I should be able to use these routes. So I have, for example, read users me. What I can do is try it out, execute, and then notice that I get my response and it tells me the user I am signed in as. Okay, now one thing to note here, I can clear this, is that we have this little lock telling me that this is an authorization route or that this requires authorization. So just worth noting there. Okay, let's go back here. Let's now go and try this one out. Okay, try it out, execute. And again, we get all of our data and it tells us who the owner is as well as the item ID. We just made that up. Of course, you could actually create a database and, store some user specific data now. So last thing I'll mention here is that this authorize button is essentially just using this post route, the /token route. So if you were on your own front end and you needed to request a token, then you would use /token. And what you would do is you would pass the username and password in your request body, and that's all you need to pass. And then it would return to you whatever data you want. Now, you can go even further and have a grant type. You can have a scope. You have client ID, client secret. I'm not going to get into that here, but this is more flexible than what I've demonstrated in this video. Okay, so with that said, I think that is going to wrap up this video. That is all I needed to show you related to creating an authorized API or an authentication-based API in Python using FastAPI. I apologize if this was a little bit confusing or went a bit over your head. Unfortunately, this is not simple stuff. There is some complicated code that we need to write, but ideally this got you on the right track and helped you kind of get started in this process. Now, if you want to go further with this, you could actually host this. For example, you could use Linode, you could host a real API, you could connect this to a front end, create some more routes like a registration route, connect this to a database. There's a lot more you could do if you wanted to continue on with this project. With that said, I'll wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed. I look forward to seeing you in another YouTube video.